Hello everyone, welcome back to Final Sector, to our debrief for the Dutch Grand Prix. This is the first one back after the long summer break, and boy, it did not disappoint. It was very chaotic all weekend. The Dutch Grand Prix is one of those that we could have very well gone into and just, it could have been very processional. It's a track that's very hard to overtake. People are even liking it even to Monaco in that sense, where it's like there's one long straight where you can overtake down, and as it turns out, it ended up being a really good overtaking point, but there was still this fear that qualifying was key, and then everyone sticks behind each other, but you throw a little bit of rain in the mix and apparently it's all hell breaks loose. So it was absolutely insane. Before we get into all of that, just a reminder to check out our mid-season podcast, 2-hour discussion where we just talk about the first half of the season and a lot of the news topics. If you haven't seen that, it's a really good, go into a lot of depth and a lot of topics, but feel free to check that out on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Music or whatever, Apple Podcasts, wherever we are. But let's get into this one. How did you see this weekend, Kyle? It was a bit of a fun one.
It was. I mean, the key clue we had going into it, which we seemingly just have every race now, is that we said, okay, there's some weather on the radar.
Yep.
Long gone are the days where we used to say, 80% rain, that means it's going to be dry, right? We used to always just
it's
about
crazy.
That if it was definite, it meant that nothing was going to happen. But even this was like, there's going to be a bit, and then no, it turned out again in almost every session to play a critical factor, right? Disrupted the entirety of practice, which then disrupted quali, and then into the race itself, which it was wild. And it wasn't just there's at one point it's just wet and one point it's dry, like we might have had in some recent rounds. This was really the crux of how elements can just force drivers to show their stuff and force strategists to earn their money. And we did see a lot of good strategists make some bad calls this weekend, and some drivers do very well and some drivers do very poor. So another good, I think, skill testing weekend for all, and that just meant it was entertaining for us viewers.
Yeah, any strategists that still have hair left after tearing, most of them are going to be bald come next weekend at Monza. But before we get into the real crazy stuff, we did see Ricciardo obviously go into the wall in free practice too, avoiding Piastri, who had just gone into the wall himself. Ricciardo did break his hand, as everyone will have seen. He was out for this. Liam Lawson comes in for this race, for Monza, and possibly for Singapore as well. They're not entirely sure. I think Ricciardo said he's looking to make a comeback for Singapore. The early suggestions from the people in the Red Bull team say that's probably a bit ambitious, so we're probably likely to see Lawson in for Singapore as well. But he kind of very much got thrown in the deep end because he one free practice session, which was in the wet at a track that is notoriously pretty tricky,
in the rain,
and then a really chaotic qualifying and race. How did you see Lawson do? Because I thought, given the circumstances, I think he did pretty exceptionally, honestly.
You can't really fault him. He had a bit of a slip slide spin in FP3, but then that's fair enough, right? He has had some sessions in the past with the AlphaTauri and the Red Bull, but the most recent of those was the last year Young Drivers Test, and that was, of course, in pretty much primo conditions to drive a car that's in the best of its cycle in terms of it being the car at the end of the year. So he hadn't driven since then. He's done very little simulator work with Red Bull, let alone with AlphaTauri. So even if it was dry at a circuit like this, it would have been difficult. And yet he had to come in when it was wet, when it was pouring. In quali, his pace started off pretty good. His final lap wasn't that great. He even said he was purposely conservative. He felt he had a lot more grip, but he's also like, I don't just want to bin it, right? But then, I mean, in the race, I think he did fine. At the start, he got his elbows out a bit. It's quite unlucky because I guess as we'll go into, he did get a penalty early on, which was no fault of his own. He did nothing wrong for that, which is unfortunate because he was actually ahead of a few cars, on genuine pace and strategy, which then pulled him behind them. But we still got to see him have a fight, right? He fought with a Ferrari. He managed to unlap himself from Max for a tiny bit, which was fantastic.
Yeah, that's
see.
right. I forgot about that part. Yep.
In a race where a lot of people didn't, he got it home in one piece genuinely ahead of a few cars. So you'd say, well, hey, if this isn't a good start, to ramp himself up into a hopefully more, relaxed Monza for him, then I can't fault him. It was bad, it was not nice the circumstances that he was there, but I'm glad that they did put him in because I think he's well overdue a shot to, try and show his face and show what he can do. So, keen to see what he can do going forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think it helped that it seemed that AlphaTauri had more pace this weekend than it has maybe the rest of the season. It seemed quite strong here. And that was, I think, a characteristic that we saw throughout the weekend of this circuit is teams that haven't really been super fast throughout the year, or maybe have those like one-off weekends where they're like really fast and then they're kind of nowhere. They sort of thrived here a little bit, maybe minus 1 or 2, but like you saw Williams obviously were super, super quick here. And I mean, that's probably testament to them. I think they have gotten a lot quicker over the course of the year. This was a big, big jump up from where they were. So I feel like that's testament to how teams have to really look at this track again, similar to kind of a Monza, where it's like it's very, very different, and sometimes your car just suits that. And it's not even like the Williams. You don't look at this track and think, oh yeah, the Williams would suit that, because the Williams have been like the real top end speed, and this is not like a real.
This is twisty, windy roller coaster land.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So
even
No, go on.
No, I was even just going to say, even when it was a little dry, it's not like they're suddenly dropped off. If it was just wet, well, then that's a bit different. Maybe that's where more of the driver skill comes in. But yeah, even in the dry, Albon was pretty happy and comfortable, and he was even jesting after quali, of course, because he did so well. He was saying, "Oh, well, I'm smiling now, but of course, we're realistic about the race and what happens." But he still has a reason to smile after that, because after all that chaos, he still came out, pretty well. I guess if we are talking about Williams though, in the other car, for Sargent, good
Mixed
he made
weekend.
Q3.
Yeah.
Bad that he then binned it, but you go, all right, at least you made it to Q3, son. It was another weekend, where still the team and all that was saying, no, we still, believe in him. We're going to give him time, see how he goes. In the race, he did have that accident. Was a simple failure. There was nothing he could do. James Vowles afterwards, I think, actually described to the media in detail what happened. It was basically like a power steering failure or something like that. Where it wasn't because he was overriding curbs, anything. It was just really bad luck, really. So it was sad to see, because he couldn't, I guess, continue to try and show some of that pace, right, and potentially roll the dice with some of the later, condition changes that happened. But at least this was showing something, right? It was like, okay, as much as it was a bit all over the place, it still was a step in the right direction. If we suspect that team to be quick next weekend, I think it's another good weekend to re-baseline as well how he's going. So
yeah, definitely. I did have Sargent as a talking point here, because I was actually the most excited I was during watching quali was when Sargent stuck into Q3, and I was
I landed a good audible.
On.
Go
on, son. I was really happy for him. So
America,
real patriots here. But I think he, like I said, he had a very mixed weekend. I think during that race, that issue wasn't his fault. He was running at I think right at the back or very close to the back when he had that issue. He was one of those that didn't, or at least he or his team, some combination of the two, didn't really make the right calls when they were needed, which is sort of why he was put back so far. I mean, I guess we'll just get into that, and then we can sort of just flip-flop around all the shit as we go. The race start, we had, I guess, can talk about the fact that we had Norris starting P2. We had, who was P3? The other guy, I can't remember. I can't remember. I got it in my other notes. Q3. It was Russell. That's right. I was thinking.
Russell.
All I could think was Albon P4. Albon P4.
I know. That was the same.
Because that's all I care about.
It wasn't Perez.
Yeah. So we had, Max, Norris, Russell, Albon, in the top four, which already was like, oh, this straight away makes it really interesting. We had Hamilton starting down in P13 for whatever reason. I know he got hindered quite a bit in qualifying and
just didn't get it right.
Just didn't quite get it right. We had Piastri starting P8, which I thought was... I don't know where his pace went for that final run, but he sort of...
No, he looked good until then and just didn't hook it up, which is unfortunate. But...
Yeah. But yeah, no, there was a lot of... drivers we expect to be sort of coming through the field that, we know they have a lot more pace on a track that we suspect was going to be quite hard to overtake. And while overtaking, it ends up, I actually saw this earlier, apparently it's the most overtakes ever in a Formula One Grand Prix. So there's that.
Yeah.
A lot of that obviously due to the chaos, but, in a track that was, you expect really hard overtaking, you're going into this thinking, boy, these... 3 young guns, the Norris, Russell, Albons, like they've got a real good chance here. And then you get to the race start, everyone's on the softs, Hamilton's on the mediums. That is a little bit important. Alonso made a really, really good start up to P3. He was really fighty, actually, right at the start. And you're thinking you're starting to see spots. Yeah, he was actually really quick this entire weekend. But then
when they started, they were saying, "Oh, it's dribbling a bit in the pit lane." Okay. And then dribbling quickly turned from a lot more than dribbling.
Yeah, well, you saw like spots on the camera, and you're just like, "Oh, okay, cool. Maybe it'll get a little bit slippery." And then you get to sector 3, and it's like, "Oh, it's wet. Oh, it's just wet. It is pissing it down now."
I love that transition where like everyone's still fighting side by side, duking it out 3 wide, and then they all suddenly just crawl because they realize, oh crap, we can't be fighting like this because there's no grip whatsoever. And then I think all the teams and the drivers have about 2 corners to go, what the hell do we do? Is it just this corner? Is it because even we said, oh, it looks like it's just right at the end. It's really bad, but we were just at T1 a minute ago. It looked fine.
Dry,
surely it's fine. And then they get back around and you go, T1 isn't fine.
No. Oh no. So
this has changed very quickly.
Yeah, we can kind of split it up into, I've got it in like lap 1, 2, 3, 4, and we have the lap 1 pitters, and they're the ones that benefited the most, the ones that did come in straight away. Even Leclerc, when Ferrari didn't have the tires ready, obviously it's a very, very late call. But to be fair, everyone else seemed to have okay pit stops, and Leclerc's, Ferrari were the only team that kind of weren't ready. So it's like, oh, they obviously were like umming, and then like, okay, he's coming around the final corner, please come into the pits, and then we'll just fucking figure it out. Seems very Ferrari-like. Everyone else seemed to get it right. But yeah, Perez was the first to pit. We had, I think the top 6 all stayed out. Perez was P7, and he was the first to come in. And you think, oh, maybe is that a lap too early? And then you start panning to the rest of the track, and you're like, oh no, he's pulled a blinder here. It is super
not
wet.
Even a lap too early, but the conversation was still, this is heavy, but it could just be heavy for a tiny bit, and therefore it wasn't just the case to say, right, everyone's eventually gonna have to get on the wet. You're finding that crossover. It's like you could ride it out and therefore save yourself 2 pit stops. So that's what a lot of them, especially Norris and that, were really thinking.
Banking on, Hamilton, I think, was banking on starting on the mediums. He wanted to... The team were like, we want you to try and break this out.
Worst tire to start on for this condition as well.
Really is. Yeah, you didn't get the benefit of the start, and then you have to come off the tire anyway. So, we had Perez come in, Leclerc and Gasly. Again, important to note that he came in on lap 1. Zhou and Tsunoda, Lawson, and Kevin Magnussen all came in on lap 1.
Which you said before it was just Ferrari that stuffed at their stop, but it was AlphaTauri that also were really slow for Yuki.
Oh, they were too, yes.
That's how they had that issue, because Lawson was a bit behind him, and they thought we can clear them both in time, but because Yuki was held up and this pit lane is so tight, like they even say in the commentary, if everyone comes in, this may simply not work because the pit lane is so tight, it can't actually fit everyone in. So Lawson came in and because Yuki was held up, then Lawson was blocking the Haas pit garage. That's what he got the penalty for, because he was blocking someone else's pit garage. And it was only because AlphaTauri was slow on Yuki too. So there was another team that was as slow as Ferrari as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, I completely missed that in all the chaos. So
yes, because everyone was just looking at Ferrari as well.
Yes.
But yes,
yeah. But
AlphaTauri did get a bit of a slap as well.
Yeah. So what that ends up meaning for the race is that Perez, by the end, like let's say lap 6 or so, when everything's actually happened, everyone's pitted or not pitted, Perez ends up P1. Leclerc and Gasly go from P9 and P11 to P5 and P3 respectively. Zhou and Tsunoda go from P17, P18 to P2 and P8 respectively. We've got Lawson and K-Mag went from literally 19th and 20th to P11 and P9. Like, they jumped a lot of drivers just by pitting on that first lap. And then you see a lot more people, actually not only a few people come in on lap 2. Max and Alonso both came in. They dropped back to P4, P6, and they were running P1, P2, or P1, P3, I guess. Although Alonso did overtake on track to P2 in the wet on that second lap. So it was P2.
Yes.
So yeah, they came in, but they dropped back even, a few places themselves.
Just from that one lap.
Exactly, and that's
and you could see it, because immediately the call was saying, well, how quickly they're actually going to have pace over everyone, right?
Yeah.
And it was incredible, because you saw, like, they showed the perfect time they showed the track map. I think the race director did. The amount of chaos there wasn't like one comment about us missing something. So shout out to the race director. I think they did pretty damn good here to show what the hell was going on.
Yeah.
But they had the map, and you saw in the third sector all these cars just crawling along. And there's just this purple dot that's just like on triple speed, just flying through. And suddenly you're like, he's already up to the back of the pack. Yep. And then it zooms out. These cars are squiggling, and these other cars are just shooting past them at the speed of sound, because they've got so much more grip. And for anyone even after that point to think we need to stay out, that's when you're like, okay, no, like I think you just need to look at this and see that Perez has gained like 40 seconds already in one lap. It's like, you can stop 3 times and you'll still, save more speed.
That's it. Yeah, I think by lap 3, I think Perez had taken the lead of, past the people who hadn't pitted yet. So it's like, and he came in, that's 2 laps. And there's about, 25 seconds lost in the pit lane, give or take. So
and I don't think it was a super great stop even for anyone that was in that first lap. So they probably lost all of them.
Yeah, so you think, 25 seconds made up. And that was before the end of lap 3 as well. Like, that was halfway, 2/3 of the way through lap 3. He's getting past, what was Russell for the lead? I think he had the lead temporarily because he stayed out.
Because Russell and Norris were still fighting while they were out there as well. They were having a tussle.
Yeah,
then it was the case of they were still saying, well, okay, we're stuffed now, right? But if the rain is slowing down, do we still just teeth it out? Because we've already done the 3 laps, we've already hit the pain. But if we box now, we could just still get hit by it. You're just in the worst position, right? You're damned if you do, damned if you don't. They just know they've completely stuffed it.
That's it. And I don't know what the right option was in the end, because we had Norris come in lap 3, Hamilton come in lap 3, and those were 2 drivers again that, like you say, tried to brave it out. Hamilton in particular wanted to stay out on the medium, and they dropped way back. I think Hamilton comes out literally dead last, and then Russell comes in lap 4. I'm guessing, I don't know if it's because they didn't want to double stack Mercedes, or maybe Russell was just stubborn about it, or
still thought they'd try it, and they just went, it's gone.
And and then he comes out P18, right. I think by that stage Hamilton had made up a couple of places and actually gotten past him as well. So even even coming in just that 1 lap earlier, then Hamilton was able to jump Russell as well. So and I think what I've got here is Albon, Piastri, Bottas, Hulkenberg, and Sargent all stay on the softs. They're the only 5 that did not come into the pits. They all, Godspeed.
Brave heroes.
Yeah, they dropped back. I'm pretty sure for while it was still wet, they dropped back to the last 5 places, as you'd expect. And then it came the point where it's like, Piastri's going pretty quickly, isn't he? And he's 5 seconds quicker than Perez in the lead. And you're like, ooh, okay, here it comes. And then obviously you start seeing everyone come back in for the slicks as well. And I guess the first bit of drama is them pitting. I guess during this time, Max was gaining on Checo quite severely, despite being on the same tyre.
He wasn't just gaining; he was taking gigantic chunks out of him.
It's almost like, he was on a dry tire in the dry, and like Perez was on the inter. Like that's how much he was. It was literally like 5, 6,
and not even just on him. Like he came down partly down the field, and he just made mincemeat of everyone. He looked in his mirror to try and defend, and he was already ahead of you. You're like, what the fuck is he gone?
Yeah,
it was obscene, his skill in those conditions. You know, magnificent to watch.
Really good. God. Yeah, and I guess I don't know. Maybe they just saw that the rain was easing up so much. Like they did say that there's potential rain in 10 minutes, but maybe they had an update that's like, okay, maybe the rain's not going to be quite as heavy. We're going to be on slick soon. Just burn through the inters, like just absolutely kill them.
Because that was an argument to say that, you know, do you try keep them in check and get the coolness in them and particularly not burn off that top surface, because I've seen it in the past where, you know, you have inters that turn into what they call slick intermediates, right? But then if it goes back to rain, they're stuffed because they've lost all that treading. So they're like a worse slick, basically. You're better to be on a used soft inter in the rain.
Warm slick,
So so they were still like, well, there's some more coming, but they were like, this actually could just be like a little sprinkle. And then, as we say, those guys that did stay out, you saw again they were starting to get 6, 7, 8. Seconds a lap faster, and that's when you went, right, look, unless it's going to happen right now, it's just not worth it. It turned out to be doubly bad for those guys that stayed out, because although it seemed like, okay, they've braved the storm, they've now got the heat into the tires because the others have to box.
But now they've spent like 15 laps on those tires.
Exactly. So as soon I was excited because I saw Piastri, he was making some great moves, and then he had to box. I'm like, what is he boxing for? I'm like, oh, because it's lap 16 and his tires are burnt. So I'm like, well, they kind of took that second stop their first stop when everyone was taking their second anyway. So even though they braved it out, they didn't even really get a payoff as well. So it was like, it was doubly just like, well, that was a crap idea.
I think he was very unlucky as well in that he pit quite literally. He came into the pits and then there was the yellow flag for the Sargent crash, and it's like he didn't even get the bonus of coming in when there was the virtual safety car or the full safety car, whatever it was. So he kind of lost out quite badly there. Like I think before that happened, he did, like you say, make his way back up to P8. I've got here. Both McLarens were really, really fast. Like Piastri and Norris
we predicted both those cars,
yeah,
especially in changeable conditions. They're always really quick, but it's when you've got that factor, as you say, of strategy. That's when it can completely change the outcome, as we saw. So they didn't get to show their true
full hand,
there you go, full hand,
So but there, like I said, we had that Sargent, as you mentioned earlier, had that front right failure, the power steering failure, and crashes into the wall, brings out the safety car. Piastri misses out by 30 seconds really. Russell pits again. He already pit when they had to come back onto the slicks, because he obviously went to the inters and then went to the slicks, and then it was like 6 laps later that he then, or 5 laps later, he then comes back in again and then goes onto the hard tire, which I thought was an interesting decision. He did end up, I think, going to the end of the race on the hard tires, but it's like, it seemed a long way. Yeah, until the red, that's right, because they got free tire change. So maybe, actually, if he had to go to the end of the race, he probably would have, as we saw with Tsunoda towards the end of the race on when he tried to gamble on not going on the second set of softs, just how much time he lost as well. He probably got a bit lucky to the red flag as well to be able to change those tires out, because I think he probably would have been mugged by all the soft runners later on too. So then we obviously had the Gasly 5-second penalty for the speeding in the pit lane, which turns out didn't really matter. I don't think it really would have affected where he wouldn't have got second. I don't think. He still manages to get P3, obviously benefited by a Perez penalty that happened a little bit later on as well.
Which both penalties, I mean, it's especially hard because the pit lane's very tight. I mean, it's kind of tied into, I guess, the second phase of the race, which I guess will go on soon, which is the second big event, you know, where that was a bit of strategy calls you could make and such. But the one for Perez is unfortunate because he got it because he smashed into the bloody wall, so he couldn't even avoid the wall to slow down the car, and bumping, sliding along the wall. He also gets the drive-through, so he not only got unlucky. Well, we thought he was unlucky because of the timing of the red flag, as it turns out, because of the rollback. You know, it worked out, but he still got the penalty because he just couldn't stop. He was full on the brake, bouncing into the walls, and even with that, he still was going too fast over the line. It's like, what more could he have done?
Well, slowed down earlier, I guess.
Not for lack of trying.
Yeah, but that ended up playing quite a big part. Definitely later, but we had that safety car. The race sort of, I guess I've just got the mid-race lull. It just sort of settled down at this point. You know, we had the full dry running. And
we were able to get a bit of breathing room. Yes. There was a little bit of okay, let's step back. And of course, because everyone was in the grid was all jumbled, it's not like nothing was happening. Like we say, it simmered down, I guess.
There was still a lot of fighting.
But there was still
a lot of moves.
There was a lot of fighting, overtaking, not even just on the main strip. People were finding all sorts of creative ways
Turn
to
3,
overtake.
Alonso
we saw a glimpse of this in prior years. Yeah, exactly. We saw a glimpse of this in prior years where people were finding, actually, you can take some really wacky lines here and get in front of people, even in the middle sector. You know, we saw later on between even, Lawson, I think, getting cheeky, sending all sorts of moves around Leclerc and actually showing that, hey, look what you can do all of this, you know? So, it's one of those tracks where, yes, it's very thin, very processional, but certain corners are wide enough where you can just send it. Even if your exit's crap, you just get in, park it on the apex. Guy behind you's compromised. You could just make a cheeky move doing that. And with the changing conditions, different cars, we saw a lot of that. It was, you couldn't even rest.
Real Gran Turismo moves that. Just park it on the apex and then no one can overtake you.
Yeah. The old Yano Trulli, just park it and form a train.
Yeah, that's it. The Trulli train.
Train, exactly.
Yeah. Classic. But like you say, there was a lot of fights through the field. You know, the McLarens were both quick, even in this period in the dry. So Norris and Piastri in particular, really, really fighty. It was good to see him, really getting his elbows out and showing that he can fight through the field like that and do it very, very cleanly and very effectively. And obviously Hamilton as well, who dropped all the way back to P20 through some poor strategy calls. Again, that Mercedes looked really quick as well, so he was fighting all the way through as well. So even though, like you say, it was a mid-race lull, there was still there's still so much to watch. And with the Mercedes and the McLaren going forward, we had the red car going backwards, and little did we know, Leclerc had quite a lot of damage. I think it was a pretty significant amount of damage from such a small, innocuous contact. It seemed like, but it just had such a lack of downforce. I think he had some damage to the floor. Was it? I think.
It was predominantly floor damage, which at any circuit in these cars is very bad because you lose all that efficiency in your ground effect and downforce. But especially here, where you really need it for those bank corners, you're a sitting duck, as we basically saw, despite his best efforts.
Yeah. So I think he had contact. It was with Piastri, wasn't it? In those, was it Piastri?
I think it might have been Piastri. I couldn't recall if it was
lap
Norris
1
and Russell that also tangled.
Was as well, and that's what put Russell out of the race. We didn't actually see that one. Speaking of the race broadcast, that's, I think, the only thing we didn't see on the race broadcast is how that happened. All we heard that was Russell got a puncture and he's out. And it's like, all right, can we see it? Okay, thank you.
We did see it.
Don't think we did.
We did see. Who was it that then?
Oh no, we saw it like 5 laps later though.
Yeah.
And it's like I wanted to see it then when he said he was out, and it's like we didn't see it for ages, and I'm like, but I want to see that. So. But
there was already some other incident with the Leclerc. I don't know if it's the same one where he also lost his end plate. I don't know if that was one and the same.
I think that was. I think he tangled with was that? I think he tangled with Piastri. Lost part of his end plate, had to come in and change his wing, and then found out there was more damage to his car, maybe? Am I wrong? Possibly. I could be wrong. Someone correct me. It was really hard making notes for this. I'm sorry.
I know. It was crazy.
Yeah, so much happening. But the important thing is that Leclerc got that damage on lap 1, and it turns out it was just so much that he just kept falling back. The team said, it's just too much. We have to retire. So probably for the best. And like I said, we've got... we had the Alonso had a really, really slow stop as well during that point where they couldn't get the front left off. And he was like sat there for like a good 8, 9, 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And that he ended up behind Sainz and Tsunoda at the time. That was when Tsunoda was running quite high and took that gamble to go the double soft strategy, or the single soft rather than the double soft that everyone else did. So turns out it didn't matter. Alonso had such a crazy amount of pace that he got past both of them pretty quickly anyway. But it was something
crazy.
Yeah. And then also during that, before we get to the crazy end, we had something that I forgot until I rewatched it, is the Hamilton catching Russell, and then Russell having that big moment of the grass going basically like sideways, somehow catching the car, which was... God, watching that, we had the perfect view of, we're on board with Lewis as well, and he's just like touched the grass a bit and just gone completely sideways, and you're just sitting there like, oh God, he's gonna crash. So, there was still, this was, by the way, this is in my notes for mid-race lol. All that shit happened during,
lol.
During the 40 laps or something we had where, quote, not much happened. And then, if it couldn't get any crazier, the wet weather came out of nowhere again, and the heavens opened. I think initially they were saying, actually about probably lap 40, 45 or so, they were coming on the radio saying, there's expected rain, we're not expecting it to be too big. And then it's like 15 laps later, they're just like, it's going to be bigger than the first one. It's going to be really heavy. It's going to happen before the end of the race.
We ain't taking no chances.
So, and then it did come, and it's just like, it's like one or two laps, and you're sitting there and like, oh, that's a river on the main straight. Like, that's just... so quickly, it just completely flooded the track.
And to the point where most people put on inters pretty much straight away because they realized, hey, let's do this. And then even if they think, because this is where there's also the side argument to say, if we think there's going to be a massive amount of rain, do you hold it out for the red flag because you can actually gain something right? But if it's that heavy, that even if you're questioning the inters, you at least have to get on those. I think it was one of the Alpines that went on the full wet.
Ocon went on full wet.
Even initially he was saying, what the hell have we done here? And then very quickly it was like, oh no, they all need to be on full wets, because then the slippery show of everyone not having enough grip on those inters, they couldn't clear enough water.
Yep.
When you got to that phase, that's when it was interesting, where I think every team was weighing up saying, look, this looks like it's just going to continue to get worse. Obviously, we know the wets are crap. They can't race around here.
Yeah.
Are they going to red flag it? Or if it continues, or we have to get them on the wets, otherwise our driver has such a high chance to just bin it, right?
Yep.
You don't want to be the driver that bins it.
Yep.
Which we did have the unlucky soul that ended up binning it, of course.
Yes.
But that's when we saw the likes of, Red Bull, of course, just for Checo, go, we've just got to get him in, right? It seemed like they were the team that, went for him. But then pretty quick after, that's when we saw, the red... As soon as you see a car kind of crash out, and, they're not just... spinning out and going onto the gravel, but then continuing on. As soon as they're out sliding into a wall, that's when you go, okay,
it's getting a bit silly.
Unless the rain is ceasing now,
yeah,
then they're gonna just flag it in this day and age just to be safe, and they're not just gonna toil around the safety car for laps and laps in the wet. They don't want to do that anymore. So
no, exactly. So I think when it all happened, we had it was starting to get quite heavy, and I think it was. Pretty much everyone came into box for inters except, again, for Verstappen, Alonso, Albon, and Ocon. And those four were the only ones that stayed out. And it was like really interesting at that point, because you're like, this is way heavier than the first one. How do they make it around this track without dying another lap? Like, and then, the next lap they do, it manages to hold off probably just enough. before, like, I think literally as they're coming around I guess Max is coming around the final corner.
Just about got away with it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you heard it in Max's race engineers, like, his tone of voice is like, now would be a good time to come in, like, real, you could tell in his head, he's like, panic. It's like, now would be a good time to come in, Max. And he's like, okay. And he comes in. So it turns out he was just so far ahead of the pack that he came in, like, behind the rest of the train when, like, all the lower drivers were coming into the pits anyway, so he probably didn't lose all that much. But we saw everyone go into the inters in those 2 laps except for Ocon, who went on the full wets, as he said. And at the time, I didn't know how much more rain there was going to be. Like, we saw photos of the radar and it looked like a pretty small cell, so like it was gonna come and then go pretty quickly, which it did. It sort of hung around a little bit longer than they maybe would have liked, but I actually thought Ocon pulled a bit of a blinder initially, at least the one lap. He was kicking up a stink, and I'm just like, bro, you could be in the lead in a second. Like,
I know.
It turns out that they probably red flagged it a little earlier than Ocon maybe would have liked, but I think it was the right decision. I think Ocon probably would have been praying for the rain to have stopped when he went onto those full wet tyres, because they maybe they would have kept going. I guess if Zhou probably didn't go into the wall, I think maybe they could have kept it going if they all could keep it on the track without aquaplaning.
I think it was close. But if it was like even 5% less heavy, I think they could have just about, been all right there. But yeah, then they saw, even when Zhou went off, it was still getting heavy, and that's when they went, no, it's no point now. Yeah, it's just going to be everyone going off.
Particularly turn 1 as well. Like, you just saw, like, obviously you saw Zhou go into the wall, and he slowed down, and it's just like, he's not slowing down. He's like full on the brakes, just lock, nothing. Yep. It's the typical aquaplaning that you see. It's like, he's got no control. He's got literally no braking power. He's going straight into that wall. And even then, like, he went into the wall, and you still saw like 3 or 4 other drivers at T1 going off, and some of them going, I think it was Hamilton maybe, who was going like really slowly, like he was half revs, really low speed, and even he went off at turn 1. It's just like, it's you can't race in that kind of weather when you're half throttle and you're still going off at turn 1. So the right call was made. They red flagged the session. I think we had 45 minutes before it ended up getting going again. Do you think we could have got going a little bit earlier? Because obviously we did restart and everyone was on the inters again. So
yes. So there's 2 factors there that I've heard in discussion. One is that still pretty soon after they red flagged, they saw that it dried up fairly quickly. But then there was like a period where some more rain could come. So people were saying, well, hey, let's just really quickly restart what we can to get ahead of it.
Yes, yeah.
There is still like a minimum heads up that teams need. And again, they can sometimes have a slower process. Like if it's, of course, the usual process, if it's non-extenuating circumstances, is actually a grid start. But in this case, they generally don't do that in the wet conditions. And I think they saw that even that second cell may be heavy but very short. So I think they said, look, we have time to play with. We still can operate within a 3-hour window, so we don't necessarily have to rush here, even if everyone wants to see cars on track. But I think that's why they waited the extra bit longer, just to say, look, let's go to a point until we can be confident that we know from there on out it doesn't look like there's going to be issues. We're going to be, okay from that perspective. So I guess that's what I heard as to why they probably waited, even though at some points it looked like it was fine. But I think they were playing with a few factors. And as I say, they weren't rushing the daylight or the total time. They could be very conservative and safe with it, so that's why they waited, I guess, until. And the separate thing is, sure, why didn't they go behind the safety car on the wets? But then, as we've talked about, many others have talked about, that wet tire really with these type of cars, if you're running on that, it's the safety car tire at this point, right? There's such a narrow window that it's good in, and there's such a big gap between it and the inters, is that if you're in any conditions that you can realistically race in, it's going to be inters conditions. Because if you're on the wets, well, then you're very close to it being just too dangerous anyway.
Yeah.
So
I guess it is important to note that the rule where you had to start on the full wet tire when you going behind the safety car or having a start behind the safety car, they scrapped that.
Yeah.
for this weekend in particular.
Well, they even said for this restart, everyone had to be on Inters.
Had to be on Inters, yeah, they actually specified.
So they didn't even give them the choice. They said, this is an Inters restart, please use them.
Yeah, so. I guess to avoid it, it wouldn't have happened, but I guess to avoid a similar thing, let's just say everyone went onto the full wets again for whatever reason, and then they all had to come into the pits to go onto the Inters. Like,
it just made it simple. They said, no, we're intending for this to be looking Inter start. Let's just not faff about here, right? So it was like, cool. And that seemed, as I say, sense prevailed. That was a good choice.
Yeah.
It worked out fine.
Yeah, and I think it was very, very much because this pit lane is so small. Like, Spa at least could... Even they were worried that they couldn't handle it there, and they've got quite a big pit lane. And Zandvoort does not have a pit lane that big, so there would have been some real issues if that decided to happen. So I do think that was a good choice. But obviously we had the restart. As you mentioned, Perez ended up getting very, very lucky that the grid was restored to before the red flag was thrown. Because he did come into the pits and then had to stop at the end of the pit lane because of the red flag. It dropped him from P3.
A few of them had that. So...
Yes, but he dropped from P3 to P6, I think it was.
It was a big drop, especially for him. Yeah.
Yes, So, I mean, it turns out he ended up P4 in the end anyway because he got that 5-second penalty, which dropped him back to P4, as we talked about earlier. And then we had the restart, and it was... I guess somewhat of a procession to the end. We did have Russell, who was really, really quick on the restart, again showing that Mercedes was really, really quick. Pretty much all weekend. Like, I think Russell was a little bit hindered being on that hard tire for so long, but you saw with Hamilton that it was really, really quick. And Russell in particular on that soft tire, the intermediate tire was super, super quick before getting that puncture after contact with Norris. I think he got past Norris, and then Norris tried to get back past, and they had the lightest of touches. I was expecting something a lot bigger when I actually ended up seeing it, and I'm just like, oh, that's so. Again, we've said this before. We've said this before. We said this at like Baku, and cars can like absolutely slam into walls or slam into each other, and it's like, it's completely fine. And then you get this like dink, and it's like, he's got a puncture, he's out of the race. It's like, bro,
didn't even affect Norris's wing at all as well. No. Like no damage, nothing. It's like a paper cut, and then it's if you told me they got as close to contact without having contact, I would have believed you, because it didn't look like, it was so innocuous, and it wasn't like anyone slid into the other. They were just coming out of a tight corner side by side, and in tricky conditions, and it's like, it's just really unlucky for Russell that it happened. What it did, But I think very, very unfortunate for him. Like I said, he was making his way through the field. He could have probably made a real charge through for a couple more positions, I think, before the end. So, real unfortunate for him. But we did get a max P1, which, surprise, surprise, he got P1 in the end. Even after all the chaos, he still managed to bring it home. I did like Alonso's comments afterwards, where he had a pretty decent run at the start on Max, and he probably was trying to bank it. But he also said if he took the position, he probably wouldn't have left the circuit alive, which I think is a fair enough statement as well. True, yep. Yeah, he drowned in a sea of orange before he can leave the circuit, but yes, full credit to Max. He didn't have the strategy perfect, but he did keep it on the road when others didn't. He had immense pace on any tire he was on. It was basically faultless, even from his perspective. From his side, yep. Definitely. And he's made certainly a good race for him to. I think you're gonna say. Oh, I was gonna say, making it 9 wins in a row. It's tying certainly the record. The good race to do it in. One of his. I know he's had some great drives, but when you look at this, from, I guess, a non-battling perspective, right, it still was a fantastic drive. Yeah, just the sheer pace, the sheer consistency. Every single phase of the race, he was just basically unstoppable. And even when he was getting, beaten for fastest laps, it's like, it doesn't matter because he's already that far ahead. And it's like the cars that are doing fastest lap are back in like P8, P9. It's just like, it doesn't matter. He's already out in front. So, it is complete dominance, and it is so hard to see him losing a race at the moment. It's hard to argue right now that he isn't that once once in a generational talent.
It does seem that way.
Just
yeah.
another weekend that's you could 9 out of not maybe that many, like maybe 60 or 70% of other drivers or even champions, and that might have had a bit of a troubled time, but he just didn't look phased by any of it.
No.
Yeah.
No, well done to Max. We obviously had Alonso back on the podium, back into P2. Really good weekend for him. I was going to say for Aston Martin, but it's really for Alonso. Stroll didn't have the best weekend.
He didn't. Yeah, Stroll himself didn't do that well, but I heard a lot that it's another weekend where you could kind of put it down to a few circumstances, and he got really badly done with the strategy, etc. Not that should, say, well, just rise above it anyway. Again, Max Alonso, if they're in that position, could rise above it, right?
Yep.
But it's, there's a caveat there.
Yeah, well, Hamilton did rise above it. He was P20 and he made his way through the field.
It's
so
true,
in a car that was, let's be honest, I think the Aston and the Mercedes maybe a little bit faster than the Aston, but like they were, I think, relatively close in terms of race pace. So there's no reason Stroll couldn't have done exactly the same thing Hamilton
100%.
did. So, and he didn't. But it's okay because he's going to retire and take up tennis as a career soon, according to that one article. And then obviously we had the Gasly, the reason I'm wearing the Alpine, we had the Gasly P3 starting P12 and making it to the podium. Yeah, he obviously drove a really terrific race. That Alpine was also looking pretty quick, at least in race trim. And Gasly was on the right side of pretty much like every strategy call as well. He was just in the pits at the right time when he needed to be on the right tyre. So, kudos. We've been talking a lot about Alpine and how they're a clusterfuck at the moment, but they delivered in the strategy department, particularly for Gasly, to get that podium. So, and Gasly obviously performed on track to do that as well, to stay within the 5 seconds of Perez to overhaul that penalty as well to be able to get the podium. So, super well done to Gasly. I think it was a pretty popular podium, I think, that 1, 2, 3. So at least from my end, but
yeah, for sure. No, it was it wasn't one like we've seen where it honestly just was a total potluck role. There still was some luck there, but also they had to keep it on the road themselves at certain intervals. And I guess as soon as you saw that Perez had that penalty, it was just keep close and bring it home. And that's what the top 3 did, really.
Yeah,
so
definitely. But I mean, that's all I had. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, but it's.
No, I think we covered it pretty well.
I tried to get as much as I could in here. I know I haven't talked about absolutely everything. Let us know your favorite moments for the race, because there were so many to choose from. But that'll do it from us. Stay tuned for the Monza preview, which will be coming out very, very shortly from when we release this video. But until then, we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Ciao.